Well, it has been an exciting day. The Activision Blizzard acquisition has some new information. A branch of the government, Rick, is it the branch of the government in the UK, has
The regulator, yeah.
has made a statement, and I brought on Rick Hoeg to kind of dive into it a little bit more. Now, you already have a pretty deep dive on your YouTube all about this, but let's talk about this statement. Now, I think the thing that everybody saw, and we're going to talk about this tweet right here, is we've been investigating Microsoft's anticipated $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard, and I've discovered that the deal could substantially lessen competition in gaming consoles, multi-game subscription services, and cloud gaming services. Now, personally, I kind of give them the multi-game subscription service angle. Like, I think they could dive into that a little bit more. Cloud gaming, I disagree on. I think there are plenty of people in the cloud gaming market that could offer PlayStation the same services that Xbox do. Actually, PlayStation currently uses Azure, I believe, to do a lot of their cloud gaming stuff. And also, Sony purchased like OnLive or something years ago to develop that technology. And then the one I disagree with the most, however, is gaming consoles. Now, Sony has recently increased the price of their console in the UK while reducing their component cost, and they have plainly said we have no concerns about sales being affected here. We know people will buy it regardless. So that was my initial reaction, but you know this stuff much better than I do. So what was your response and reaction to this news this morning?
Well, my response was certainly to the fact that a lot of people are very interested in this story, and a lot of people had a lot of questions from it. And that's, I think, one of the reasons you don't usually see announcements like this, right? So at the end of the day, what we're looking at right now is a UK regulator in the Competition and Markets Authority that has gone out there and said, we think we need to look at this deal a little bit closer. And one of the things that I think was apparent across the globe when this was announced in January, the reason Microsoft says we're taking until the middle of next year to say that we're going to close this deal is that for the most part, regulators were always going to take a deeper look at this. It's almost $70 billion. It's 7 times the next largest purchase, acquisition in the video game industry. It's also why when people say, hey, what about Bungie and things like that, it's just not the same kind of level as purchasing Activision, Blizzard, and most importantly, I would say King, which is one of the things that Phil Spencer mentions in his
Yes.
response today. But when these regulators go and they do a phase two, as the UK calls it, or a second look, as the Federal Trade Commission calls it, in the United States, they don't usually sound the trumpets and put out a Twitter thread and then a press release and then a summary of findings and things like that, because this is very early days yet. And the UK has looked at things and said there could possibly be something. It's a very low standard. They admit that in their press release. They admit that in their summary, but it makes people a little bit crazy, right? So people say, oh my God, is the deal dead? Is there a significant problem here? And what I would caution people before we get into any of the weeds on this is that this is basically the same as what we've seen happen across the regulators. This is happening at the Federal Trade Commission. We know it happened a while ago. It's happening in the EU. They're looking for more information. They're doing more interviews. They're getting more stuff together. But the UK so far is the only one that's really gone out and publicly said, we think there could be a problem here. And I think that at the baseline level, we think this could possibly, potentially, in some universe be a problem, is probably an okay regulator stance to have. I think where we get into issues is with Twitter threads and with summaries and with people reading them. So you went down the list here. Gaming consoles is almost patently ridiculous as a market of its own, that this could cause a problem for. Microsoft is not the leader in that. As you pointed out, Sony is almost demonstrating an experimental monopolist model in the UK, which, if you're familiar with the way that antitrust regulators look at these things, is they pretend that a company has taken a non-transitory increase in the price of the product and became more profitable to establish that they have market power in that market. So you do a 10% increase, you think you'll be more profitable. You're basically demonstrating that you have market power in that specific jurisdiction. So that's interesting in and of itself. You know, we might wind up disagreeing on Game Pass. I have said since the start of this that that was the most likely avenue for an aggressive regulator to really look at, because it's
Yeah.
so new, because Microsoft keeps touting it as the future of gaming and lucrative. And if you get specific content there and you make it exclusive, that's going to open you up to raising the prices and doing all sorts of bad things that regulators are worried about. So I always thought that was the most likely avenue for them to go. But I still think there are issues there. Cloud gaming, I think you're right? Sony buys whatever it was, Gaikai back in the day. They make PlayStation now. They've been streaming. Azure in and of itself has a competitor in Amazon Web Services and all these kinds of things. that I think make those problematic. The biggest one, I would argue, is that by putting subscription services and cloud gaming services in these kind of separate buckets and labeling them different with emojis and the rest on Twitter
Yeah.
is suggestive of the fact that they believe they are separate markets, right? You have to look at market power in specific markets. And I'm not sure that either the CMA or anybody else can make the case that buying a game or playing a game or experiencing a game through cloud or through Game Pass is a distinct market from purchasing that same game from a similar store like Xbox or the PlayStation Network. And I think even Sony said that in the answers that we know they gave to the Brazilian authorities. And so that's probably the diciest proposition here is, are those really separate markets that you can monopolize for this purpose?
Yeah, my whole reaction to this feels like the exact talking points that we saw in the Brazilian market. So did they reach out to Sony and get comment from them and then just...
Percent. Yeah, every regulator has,
Mhm.
right? So every regulator, when they're doing this analysis, goes and looks at the market participants and says, "Hey, what do you guys think?" That can be in kind of the phase one, or can be more specifically in the phase two. But yes, if you go and you read the CMA summary from this morning, very specifically, there's a paragraph, but there's a number of instances where it is line by line what we know Sony's response was on specifically the Call of Duty question. That is there anything so special that it could be really problematic for you? It is specifically line by line. It's Call of Duty is super special and it takes a ton of people to make and nobody can copy it and these kinds of things that we know was in Sony's answer in the CMA summary. And that's pretty wild. That's like cutting and pasting from a press release.
Yeah, and I called it out. I'm like, this sounds exactly like what Sony laid out. That was a little suspicious to me. I was surprised that they would be so brazen.
A regulator can just go and say, we agree. I mean, like at the point where you say, yes, I think they're right, then you just put it in. But it is unusual. One of the things I said from those Brazilian answers is that, Sony is making those answers to try to get the consent decree that they know they're going to get, that Microsoft has already agreed to, which is that Call of Duty will be multi-plat and release day and date of feature parity and whatever. And they know that they're going to get that. So Sony's just making sure everybody knows, yes, we still want that. That'd be fantastic. But I didn't actually anticipate that an agency like this, which again, it's at early stages. It's not yet something that really folks should be super worried about. It's at the same place as the FTC and the EU and things like that after today's announcement. I didn't think that they would adopt wholeheartedly this notion that harm to Sony is harm to competition, which is what we're going to get to a little bit more in this Twitter thread, I think.
Yeah, so let's actually go down the Twitter thread. That's where I was going to go next. And basically the next tweet is that Microsoft is one of the biggest players in the gaming industry. Okay, yep. That's true. Together with Sony and Nintendo UK, they've led the games consoles market for the past 20 years with limited competition from new rivals. Now, okay, they do lump them in together with Sony and Nintendo. And actually, this phrasing makes me think that they're trying to say, and I'm just trying to get the interpretation correctly, and let me know if you got the same thing. They're saying that Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft prevent new consoles from being developed, not just Microsoft.
Well, they haven't gotten to anything yet, but in this one, they're just kind of laying out the lay of the land. They cheat a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Because the first sentence is about the gaming industry. Yep, they're a big player in the gaming industry. And then they talk about limited competition in only the console space. And then we can have arguments about, well, is PC competitive with consoles? Could you bounce between those? Could you look for substitutes there? How about mobile? How about Steam Deck? Having all these conversations. And so they cheat. They go from gaming industry to console market, where, yes, I guess there's limited competition from new rivals making boxes under TVs. But does that actually end the case for them? And that's just them kind of summarizing the setup here.
And on that, one thing I'm surprised that nobody's talking about I do feel like the quote from Phil Spencer recently where he said consoles are fading is very true. It's going to be about ecosystems in the near future, about being able to play on multiple platforms. Sony's confirmed that they're going to be developing more mobile games and that they're going to be developing more PC releases of their big releases because they want more people to experience their product. So this old idea that any of the companies, honestly, is preventing new people from entering the console market. I actually think it's true, but I also think the console market isn't something people are looking to get into these days.
And I think you see Microsoft pushing for that, right? I mean, at the start of this generation, not so long ago, it was Sony with their walled garden, it was Nintendo with their weird stuff, and it was Xbox trying to go for software as a service. And it's pretty clear, based on what we can see from Sony, who's acting on their internal analytics and everything else, that Microsoft is right, that Sony's moving into PC, that Sony's moving into a Game Pass-like service, that Sony's moving into mobile. And so, yeah, I think Microsoft has that kind of first step. They saw they needed to change after the One era, and now they have kind of an advantage there. So I think that's accurate. And then that again goes to kind of, do we need to preserve the status quo in a given market that maybe won't exist in a couple of years?
Yeah. Continuing on, Activision Blizzard develops and publishes one of the world's best-selling and most recognizable gaming franchises, including Call of Duty and Warcraft. That's nothing to argue there. That's true.
Introduced you, man. Nice wizard emoji, by the way.
Yeah, right. What is up with that? Like, was this written by like the 19-year-old intern or something? Getting a little sassy?
Tell me why they're adding anybody but Microsoft and Activision on this. Why in the world are Sony and Nintendo added on this Twitter thread? What is happening?
Yeah, it's very interesting for a regulatory body to be doing these things. Anyway, do not enter sign. We're concerned that if the deal goes ahead, it could harm rivals, including recent and future entrants into the gaming industry, by refusing or hindering access to Activision Blizzard games. Now, I feel like they've said it until they're blue in the face at this point, but they have confirmed that they will not make Call of Duty platform exclusive and that it will still be able to come to other platforms. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if they expanded the reach of Call of Duty through this deal to a brand like Nintendo. So how did you feel about this statement?
This is the worst statement that they make, actually.
Yeah.
I would argue. And that's primarily because they lose focus on what antitrust regulators are supposed to focus on, which is competition. And this is one area where I think they lose focus throughout their documents. And this is a very tricky thing for antitrust regulators. I do not begrudge them that this is a tricky thing, but they are protecting competition and not competitors. And the main problem that they have, when you're looking at it and you're looking at a tweet like this, is that they are supposed to protect a competitor going nuts on somebody, right? They're supposed to protect what I've described on my video and in other places as the fairness of the soccer pitch, right? Equal teams, flat field. And yet, if you provide for that, one team scores, that harms the other team. They're now down. That's okay. We're okay with that. What we don't want to have happen is that one of the soccer teams takes a billy club out and knocks out 3 of the people's legs. That's what we want to avoid. And here, when you say if the deal goes ahead, it could harm rivals, that's what Sony has said. Sony has said if you make Call of Duty exclusive, more people might buy Xboxes and fewer people might buy PlayStations. And
yeah,
that's not anti-competitive. That is, in fact, specifically competitive. The question is, are they using some form of market power to restrain trade or substantially lessen the nature of competition? And that's where I think some of this stuff gets confused in this Twitter thread, in their summary, in their press release, which is you do get some of this, well, this could hurt Sony's market share. And that's not enough, generally speaking. At the phase 1 level, it might be you're just trying to go to the phase 2 investigative stuff. But it's not written well, and that's why you're seeing so much interest in these communications from the UK, because it sounds very much like we have to protect Sony at all costs. It's like, you don't really want to go out with that.
And these sick emojis have me super interested too.
They are cool. They are cool.
The final statement was Microsoft and Activision Blizzard now have 5 days to make proposals, 5 days to address our concerns. If any proposals are not sufficient, we'll explore this deal in more depth to reach a final decision that works for UK gamers and businesses, meaning phase 2.
It's funny. It's most of these regulatory bodies go from phase 1, which is kind of everybody has to turn in their info. Are you going to do anything? And then if the regulatory body says, hey, that's a really big deal, maybe we should look at this further, they just go and look at it further. Here, the UK puts on a big show and says, you could offer settlements to us within the next 5 days, or else we're going to have to look at this more closely. It's like, okay. I mean,
yeah,
Microsoft
we will.
might. They might. I mean, the big trick of this is that Microsoft's got a bunch of jurisdictions to kind of manage. And so they're going to have a consent decree. We know they're going to agree to put Call of Duty multi-platform. That's what they've signaled out to all these regulators and to us for months now. So we know that's going to be a part of a consent decree. And then the trick is getting all the lawyers to work on the same kind of concept. We can all agree across jurisdictions that this is what we're going to agree to. And so that's what's going on right now. It sounds rather threatening, if it's not met to our satisfaction. It's like, well, okay, we're going to look at it further. Fine. That consent decree process, or as I understand it, they call them undertakings in the UK. That's what they're referenced as in the press release here. Those can be accepted at all sorts of levels. So we'll see. This got a lot of people heated. And I think ultimately this should have been expected. All regulators are going to go to whatever the equivalent of phase 2 is for them. And there we are.
Microsoft has responded. I'll get to that in just a second. What is the current status of the FTC investigation? Because last I heard, they had 30 days to respond to what's the status of that? I haven't heard anything since then.
Right. So people get into timers and things. And so in general, the second phase in the FTC land is that when you have provided all the documents and information we have asked for, we then have a window of time to decide whether we're going to try to stop the deal or we're just going to let it go through. Importantly, the FTC and the DOJ, the US regulators here, they don't approve deals. We don't approve things. We just let them happen. And then they can still sue you after the fact. It's a very interesting quirk of United States law. But we don't get great information on that on the outside. As I said, the FTC doesn't do Twitter threads. They are not sick with emojis, as it turns out, on these various things. They think it's more important for everybody to keep low and to have good, robust discussions about what a settlement might look like and those kinds of things without tweeting them out. I tend to side with the US on this kind of thing. I'm an American lawyer after all, but we don't get great transparency there. And so when you saw rumors of Microsoft has said it has turned everything in, one of the things I told people is that Microsoft is not the final decider on that. So the FTC gets the right to ask for all this information, and Microsoft can't just turn in a box of information and say, we did it, we're done. That's not how this works. Now, we have seen other companies try that. We saw it with Amazon and MGM, where effectively they said, we have turned in everything we're going to turn in, sue us or let us go. And ultimately the FTC decided not to sue, and that deal went through. And that appears to be what Microsoft tried to do. Again, all that information was leaks and innuendo, right? We didn't get any, there's no press releases on this. Mm-hmm. And so when people were running that timer and asking me about it, I'm like, if they decide, for instance, within that timer, the FTC says, look, we think we could block this deal. We think that it could substantially lessen competition. And so we got to go to the consent decree table, which is almost certainly what has happened because they're going to go get their consent decree. Then there are no timers. We're now in the midst of negotiations. We might ask for more information. We're going to decide on what a settlement looks like, and that's going to take some time. And because they have to get all the jurisdictions done for this deal to make sense, the U.S. is going to be a driver of that, but they're going to work with the timing of everybody at the same time. You're looking at a months-long kind of initiative. I continue to say this deal is going to go through. I continue to say it's going to go through in Q1 of 2023, not some of the earlier dates you've seen some people float out there. But you're not going to hear about it unless things break down.
Yeah.
If things break down, you will get the full FTC press release, and we're suing over this to block this deal to save you, the consumers, and whatever other reasons they might have for that. We saw that with the Facebook Within acquisition very recently with some really crazy Federal Trade Commission language that should put Microsoft in a little bit of heartburn to see if they go that crazy with them. But that's when we see it. Right now, when we want to be at the settlement table, everybody's quiet.
I'd love to ask you whatever happened with the Senator Warren statement. It just seemed like it went nowhere. It seemed like it was grandstanding. And
so mostly diffused the senator's stuff on labor. So most of their letter was related to a kind of monopsony theory that Microsoft will be too controlling of a buyer of labor services. And Microsoft negotiated with the CWA, the Communication Workers of America, to essentially pre-agree that Activision could unionize in any way that they wanted. CWA switches to supporting the merger, and that argument is unlikely to hold water long term.
Yeah. Anyway, Phil Spencer responded in a blog because we're doing this all public now, I guess. Basically, gaming for everyone, everywhere. Our view on the Activision Blizzard acquisition. Now, I've highlighted some key points. To reach the billions of players where they are, and no matter what device they play on, we need to embrace choice. They continue on. We intend to make Activision Blizzard's much-loved library of games, including Overwatch, Diablo, and Call of Duty, available in Game Pass, being very upfront. Those games will be on Game Pass, and to grow those gaming communities. By delivering even more value to players, we hope to continue growing Game Pass, extending its appeal to mobile phones and any connected device. A few other notes here. That's why, as we've said before, we are committed to making the same version of Call of Duty available on PlayStation on the same day the game launches elsewhere. So sure, you can buy it for $70 on PlayStation. Go right ahead, or come on over here to Game Pass, right? So
you'll note You'll note they don't commit to day one when they reference them being on Game Pass. That is a specific choice. That doesn't mean they haven't decided, and one way or the other. It does mean they didn't advertise it in this blog post. Day one is notably missing from that sentence.
Well, because they want to seem like they're playing nice. But in reality, if those are day one and your option is $70 or $10 or $1 or whatever Game Pass is, then that sweetens the pot for a consumer. Continuing on, though, we will continue to enable people to play with each other across platforms and across devices. That's great. Saying like we're going to stay committed to crossplay. And they said we will continue to engage with regulators with a spirit of transparency and openness as they review this acquisition. Are there any of these statements that you want to dive into more? Because I felt like these were the key points from this lengthy press release.
You know, I will say this, right? I highly recommend everybody go check out this particular blog post, which I don't often do because it's always corporate messaging, massage, and things like that. But for corporate messaging, this is about as spicy as you can get if you're sitting in Phil Spencer's CEO spot. He spends early paragraphs effectively saying what you started out with, which is we are expanding choice. Talking about the market definition, right? We talked about that at the top of this video, but saying essentially you guys are all getting it wrong. And it's probably not just the CMA, right? This is probably mirrored at the FTC and the EU levels and say, look, these aren't separate markets. These are expansions of the current market, which means we're broadening the base of people that can play. We're lowering prices. We're increasing the quality of life that they get from these things. We need to start looking at it that way. So the first like 3 paragraphs of this blog post are actually subtweets to the effect of, you guys are dumb. And we're doing this the proper way and we're making things better. You don't have to agree with Phil Spencer on that, but it's pretty aggressive in framing in that specific way.
Let me bring up one to back up your point really quick. We are expanding choice in 2 ways through the creation of Game Pass, which gives players a subscription option, and by bringing more games to mobile platforms, including through our cloud game streaming technology. I just saw that and I'm like, that's exactly what he's talking about.
That's exactly right. And then in the next paragraph, one of the things that you see is he throws shade at Apple and Google, which is the big bads in the world of regulatory environment today, right? We've got legislatures in the EU and Washington, D.C. and other places looking at potentially cracking open the App Store and things like that. Tim Sweeney's big crusade, which is going to lose him a federal lawsuit, but maybe win him everything he wants in the long run. And he says essentially about cloud gaming, this promises to open up mobile gaming outside of mobile app stores. So he's spending these various sentences throwing shade in various places, and it's pretty darn aggressive. It's like, look, you guys hate Google and you hate Amazon and Android and all these various other things. Come after us. Let us do this for you. We're the ones that are going to solve this technologically. Stop being so silly. Before they get into like anything else, which is, yes, we're going to do that with Call of Duty. That to some extent, this makes sense from Microsoft. It's not disingenuous exactly, but it's also not unexpected from the regulators to say, that's wonderful that you are saying that in blog posts and saying that on roundtable discussions. We're going to need that in writing, right? Like it's delightful. You're not getting out of it just by touting it because we know better than to just let you change it on day 2. So this is going to be a part of a consent decree. And you also heard their CEO say, we don't think this needs to be part of a consent decree like 4 months ago. It's like, no, it's like the famous last words. We don't need to write this down. Okay. But yeah, they're going to write it down. So I think the one thing I would take away from it is it's pretty darn aggressive. You also see a reference, essentially an oblique one, to Sony and Tencent buying major parts of From Software yesterday. And him bringing all of this stuff up. And I think that's noteworthy.
On that note, really quick, nobody's talking about the fact that in that investment statement, From Software says we're going to be making mobile games. And like, I'm very surprised that nobody picked up on that, because to me, I'm like, that's kind of a big deal. From Software is going to be working with Tencent to develop a mobile property. Is Tencent or NetEase?
Well, it's Tencent and Sony that invested yesterday.
Yes,
I didn't read the investment.
There was a NetEase bought Quantic Dream. I'm getting them mixed up.
NetEase did buy Quantic Dream. Yeah.
So there's a lot of this stuff going on in the industry right now. And I just find it interesting that Sony's whole strategy is, oh, poor us. And I'm like, you're $5 billion ahead of Microsoft in terms of revenue. You just had a terrible quarter and posted $1.3 billion in profit, and you're increasing the price of your products and to your point, that in itself does seem sort of, I don't want to misquote you, but did you say anti-competitive or did it?
wouldn't say it's anti-competitive. It's evidence of market power.
Market power. Yeah.
And so that's that's the joke, is that like that's literally how you test for market power, is you pretend somebody goes and does like a 10% increase in their price, and do they maintain profitability or increase it? And the answer is that Sony doesn't make that choice if they don't think it's going to increase their profitability or lessen their unprofitability, depending. But either way, have a higher number coming in. And so that is interesting in and of itself. But again, I think the one thing I would have as the takeaway here is that this is kind of where the UK should be expected to be. Their paperwork is dumb. I would not adopt everything that Sony said with respect to, oh, it harms us and that kind of thing. But looking at a deal of this size and nature closer is, I think, probably exactly what every regulator should be doing. And that's why you get some of the niceties in Phil Spencer's blog post from Brad Smith, their VP of like government relations, saying, yeah, this is an important big deal. Regulators should be looking at it. We think they're wrong, and here's why, but they should definitely be looking at it.
Yeah. There's plenty more to dive in here. If people want to know more about this whole thing, I highly encourage them to go over to Rick's YouTube channel. You have a 2-hour long video where you kind of went ham on this whole thing. I just wanted to talk about it, you know, from my sort of casual perspective with a friend in the industry. And I appreciate you stopping by. So where can people watch your stuff? Where's your YouTube if they don't know?
Absolutely. Well, that's the aforementioned 2-hour video is at Hoeg Law. It's virtual legality. We did it live, so we got some viewer questions happening at the same time that we responded to. But we did go through the Twitter thread, which leads to a press release, which leads to a summary of findings, and then we went over the Phil Spencer response, the Brad Smith response, and also the Bobby Kotick response, who at Activision has taken on a bit of a Microsoft persona. Oh, yes, the regulators are wonderful, and we're going to just do everything we can for them. Which is interesting,
Of course.
right? It's a little bit more. We're going to be bought by Microsoft. We're going to be nicer about this. Certainly more so than the California messaging. But please do check that out. And then you can always get previews of my videos on my Twitter at Hoeg Law, where I respond to this as soon as everybody starts asking me about it, and I say a few things there before that. But please do check it out. It was a lot of fun. I think it was in depth, and a lot of people had a lot of good questions about things.
Yeah, I'll link to all that. I'll link to your YouTube channel in the description below so people can check it out. Thank you for watching over here on the Destin channel. While I have you, thank you to the members for supporting this channel. We're going to get out of here, but we'll see you for the next one. Bye for now, everybody. Thanks, Rick.
Hey, no problem.